Hi, everybody. I am here today with my friend and fellow content creator around polymathy, Dustin Miller, PolyInnovator. Woo!
Pew, 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 pew. Well,
So,
thanks for having me.
yeah, Dustin, before we dive in, why don't you give an introduction to who you are and what you're about, what you care about, and it's Flex Friday, so brag all you can. Don't be shy.
I'm not great at bragging, but I'll try. I am Dustin Miller, PolyInnovator, an omnichannel content creator, which means that I make videos, podcasts, blog posts, and short form content as well. I try to be everywhere. So, like, one thing I like to do on shows like this is I always try to tease people. I bet there's a platform that you can't find a platform that I'm not on. At the very least, don't have a profile on. And I love challenging people because if they come back to me like, "Hey, you're not on this one," then I find a platform that I need to be on at that point, which is kind of fun. But as a content creator, disseminating your big pieces to all those small platforms is important. And so I try to take this octopus like approach. And I feel like as a polymathic person, that is actually kind of a cool thing. I actually just made a post recently called the Polymath Content Creator. And it was kind of twofold, where one of which is I'm a content creator around this topic of polymathy like you, right? But I'm also having to take a polymathic approach to my content creation. I think a lot of people who are higher up in the skill ladders of content creation, they have to do that, but they don't know the word polymaths. They don't know they're doing it, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. And what made you first get fascinated and passionate about polymathy?
Yeah, because I know you and I talking with Barry, and I think he might have asked that too, or someone asked that, and I was trying to think about what really sparked it, and I don't know when it started, but I do know that I was always interested in entrepreneurship, and I see there's kind of some overlap with that whole wearing many hats and just taking a diversified approach between entrepreneurship and polymathy.
Mhm.
So even from a young age, I had that diversified outlook. And
Well, how
then
old were you when you started your first business?
around 9 or 10.
Yeah, that's what I
Yeah.
figured.
So like really young. And then on top of that, when I was in middle school, I was obsessed with Da Vinci and made a really in-depth presentation on him. Like I remember we went to the library of the school and we all set up our presentations and mine was the most detailed and filled out poster board. Everyone else just kind of half it, like just had half effort on their posters. And I was like, no, I want to give you guys as much information as possible because this guy is so cool. So I had a fascination with like Renaissance people even back then.
Hmm. And telling me about so what have you been doing about it? Like, tell us
Yeah.
about all the work around polymathy you've been doing these past years.
Yeah. So one thing that just to answer your last question a little bit more, and I think leads into the next one, when I started working at my first job, this recreation center, I started adding more and more roles. And so I started doing, I was like a swim instructor, lifeguard, pool manager, water books instructor, then personal trainer, supervisor, fitness attendant. Like I did so many different things, taught so many different kinds of classes, and doing so many different things and being kind of pulled between so many different directions started really exciting me. I really liked that kind of just craziness of doing six different roles at once. And around the same time, I also brought into the world my first blog. And I started talking about world unity and self development and creating a hub of innovators, that kind of thing. And this idea eventually evolved into my personal brand, PolyInnovator, which is like basically my online name at this point. It's who I am online. It's an online reputation. And PolyInnovator stands for a polymath of innovation. And sure, polymaths are naturally innovative, but I really want to just hone in on that innovation aspect. But that pathway evolved from that previous endeavor, that previous blog. And I was really passionate about creating content and trying to make a change in the world. And I figured that this PolyInnovator foundation for the rest of my life is the key to doing that.
Hmm. Nice. And can I just point something out? This is a little weird of me,
Yeah.
but you spent a lot of your life working in a recreation center with lots of different hats.
Hmm.
I pronounce it recreation center. A minute ago, you sort of
It's a
said it more
recreation.
like recreation. And I went, wow, recreation. Isn't that a cool idea that we can recreate
Hmm.
ourselves and that there might be a center for that? And it's physical recreation, right? It's physical
Yeah.
recreation when you go and you work out and you exercise and you create yourself anew. But what about mental recreation? Like, isn't that kind of what polymathy is?
Yeah, because you're constantly switching up and changing. And I even in the post I was writing today, I was writing about how like a polymath is someone like three or more expert level expertise, but honestly, we have a lot of little ones too, right? We get interested and curious about many different things, and we kind of have this bias, partially because of our specialist society, and partially just because of our own minds, where we have to pursue each interest down to a level of like expertise. But sometimes you don't have to. Sometimes you just want to challenge your brain and find something new and kind of recreate yourself with this new skill, as you're saying there too. And I just wanted to kind of point out this idea that you don't have to be an expert in that field if you're interested in it. You can just play with it and then move on to the next one. You could already be experts in other fields too. You don't have to be in all of them.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I think some people think about polymathy like, I mean, it is associated with having depth in multiple fields. Like a poly expert is a way of thinking of it. But you may also just dabble in things too. Like you may have multi expertise, and
Yeah.
you may like explore things broadly and try things out and be a dabbler. Like you don't have to be all dabbler or all polymath. You might be like part polymath and like a little bit of a dabbler, you know?
And one thing I've talked about a lot is this multidisciplinary spectrum of words, like the Jack. I don't know why I have
It's
this on Do Not
okay.
Disturb. I have
That
it
was
on
a
Do
good
Not
little
Disturb.
ringtone.
I know. I have it
Yeah.
on Do Not Disturb, so that's weird. But I have this idea of like, okay, you have a jack of all trades, generalist, and leveling up to polymathy. But one thing that I've never mentioned is that I don't think you lose the jack of all trades part of it. Like I think you still kind of keep that wide-ranging approach, even when you are a polymath or even a specialist too. You can be T-shaped. I think there's a lot of T-shaped people who are wide-ranging as well, and I think it's just fascinating as a concept.
Yeah. You know what I feel kind of compelled to ask you? We've never, as far as I recall, we have not talked about this.
Okay.
But okay, we've both been in the polymathy space for years.
Oh,
For me,
ages.
it's been, I mean, I started my dissertation in 2015. It's now
Mm,
2020. So it's been almost a decade of like working on, well, I didn't work on the dissertation the whole time, but working on the dissertation, graduating, making social media, speaking at conferences, books, articles, all that stuff. Like I have been obsessed with polymathy for half of my adult life. And the more I think about it, I continue to get insights and aha moments. I continue to learn about polymathy more deeply and broadly. And the more I go along, the more I realize this. And I even describe on my LinkedIn, I put I'm a freedom fighter because I feel like I'm fighting and promoting this simple concept that you should be able, you should have at least some part in developing your own mind rather than it being created almost entirely from culture,
external. Yeah.
education, expectations, parents, peer pressure, groupthink, genetics, culture, the time you're born in, the body you get. Like there's so much that creates us from the outside, but I do believe that free will is possible. It it's possible. So this is about freedom
Yeah.
and creating and recreating really yourself.
I'm going to interject there because it makes me excited too, because I definitely have always embodied the opposite, where I've always been internally motivated. I've actually ignored a lot of external factors. And I think that's helpful to this kind of
Yeah,
conversation here
sure.
because it's lucky. I'm lucky that
Wired.
I had that, I was wired that way. Like even in school, I'd be pushed towards one way or try to be pushed towards college. And I knew it wasn't for me, at least not at that time. It wasn't for me. And my best learning experience in high school was when I went to the library and just burned through the philosophy section in a matter of months, like just voraciously reading and curious about it. And that was my best learning experience in high school, despite the fact I had great classes and I learned a lot about, video editing and website making in high school, and I loved that. It wasn't the same. And so being pushed towards specialism and yet still choosing to be a generalist, I think that's really something I'm proud of.
It's an act of rebellion. It really is. Oh, can I just share one quick thing about me that was like
Yeah.
such an act of rebellion? I mean, I was in a doctoral level program. Like I was supposed to be the most hyper specialized an expert can get. That's what becoming a doctor, an academic doctor means. You pick your niche. And my niche, I became hyper specialized in not being hyper specialized and like
Yeah.
the benefits of that and how we need those people too, because we've been in this narrative that like everybody should specialize. And it just didn't feel right for me. And so I was like, when I grow up, I want to be a Renaissance woman. So I'm going to study that. And I managed to graduate with a doctoral degree as a hyper specialist in not being specialized.
Thank you for taking this the sacrifice.
I took one for the team. I was a
Yeah.
rebel.
Well, and what's funny is that I've actually had to play with this as well because I don't believe in niches or niches, whatever you want to call it. And like, sure, that does make a lot of sense when it comes to like search engine optimization and making sure that your YouTube channel or blog actually gets picked up by the algorithms and stuff like that. You need to optimize for your niche. Sure, that is true. But you don't necessarily have to be a one niche creator. You don't have to necessarily be just one specialty niche. Like, you don't have to focus on just one thing. And for me, polymathy had been my quote unquote niche, but I kind of called it my meta niche or anti niche because it gave me permission to have sub
Anti-niche.
niches. Well, because I talk about modular education or swimming or content repurposing and gaming and even a couple other ones as well down the line that I had planned out already. But it's interesting how like that meta niche gave me permission to do the other topics.
Yeah, for sure. So what you're saying is that for you, polymathy does relate to freedom,
Yeah.
mental freedom, right? It is real many learnings, and it's kind of about self-directed learning, having agency in the
Mm.
own creation and recreation of your mind space. Terence McKenna said that, the quality of our minds is the quality of our lives. Let me say that again. The quality of our minds is the quality of our lives. Like, it is the most fundamental space we experience first and foremost. And it's the one place that should be really yours.
And one thing to keep in mind too is that your personal space around you affects your mind as well. So if you have a cluttered physical space, your mind is going to be cluttered as well. So I try to have my desk nice and clear, keep my cables organized, keep my space empty. You can see behind me that like there's nothing on the floor or something like that. I don't have like shirts laying down or anything like that.
Yeah,
Keep a nice clean space. So you have a nice clean head, but kind of relates to what you're saying.
exactly. Exactly. So polymathy it's kind of self-bestowing your own freedom upon you when you choose to be a rebel and learn what you want to learn.
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to. Okay. Why else are you passionate about polymathy? Like, what else about it? But we've talked about that it's creating yourself, it's about freedom, it's about learning and all the stimulation you get from that. But why else do you love polymathy? Like, what is it about this way of thinking and being that makes you love it so much that you do all this work for years over it?
Oh man. Well, and you were mentioning how you've been at it for about a decade. Ironically, for me, I started talking about being like multidisciplinary or kind of having this playing with that idea when I first started 10 years ago, but I took a big break in between. And so I've only been talking about polymathy for the last like 4 years or so, despite the fact I've been creating content for the last six,
Mm.
like consistently, or if you will. And I've been trying to go at it for a pretty hard, like a lot amount for this time span because I feel like there's this. I think you agree with this too. There's this kind of just missing. It's just not out there. Not enough people are making content around it. And one thing that I really wanted to do was kind of synergize certain ideas. So I think I told you last week or whatever, I wanted to make a post about stoicism and polymathy and
Mhm.
how those two relate. I bet there's actually probably a way I could go about Buddhism and polymathy, for example, too.
Mhm.
And then today, my post that I was talking to you about before the call is the 15 lessons I learned the hard way as a polymath. And I think that that's something that was really interesting to me. When I was writing it out, I started remembering certain lessons. I was like, oh, that's actually really cool. And the fact that I'm putting it all together into this list post creates this new unique piece of content. I might have made posts about each lesson already in the past, and they all have their own individual posts out there. But having it all together really gives us kind of holistic view that just doesn't exist yet. And seeing that, I think is going to be really helpful for a lot of people.
Yeah. Can we talk about that? Can we talk
Sure.
about some of the lessons you learned the hard
Yeah.
way about what it's like to be a polymath? And I
Yeah.
might chime in with some of what I've learned too. But yeah, let's talk about what you drafted and have a discussion around it.
So the first one is learning how to market myself. And that's why I created PolyInnovator because I wanted to have a word because I my previous name was Polyocean, which was like a weird name, a weird combination of like my previous endeavor with polymath, and this didn't really quite work, didn't roll off the tongue. People were so confused about it that they ignored what I was creating. And so that distraction was not marketable, it wasn't good marketing. And so I wasn't able to explain my multidisciplinary life to people because that word blocked them. So I thought PolyInnovator is much more simple approach to it. It has kind of a ring to it. And PolyInnovator, like you can kind of get the idea of what I'm going for there, innovating many areas across my life. And learning how to build a personal brand and understanding the reputation online in the world and how to I don't want to say manipulate, but just market yourself through that. Because you have to be a marketer. That's the thing people don't realize. People think marketing is like a business term, but no, marketing is how you explain yourself to others. And there is this real critical issue in the whole polymathy world where they don't know how to explain themselves to others because they're like, which one do I talk about? Do I talk about this specialty or this one or all of them? And sometimes you have to choose, and that's hard. So let me give a quick example before you share something. I had a guest on my show, the Polymath Polycast, where he was talking about two plumbers. One plumber who was making a sign for, hey, if you have a clogged drain, I'm really good at that. I can fix it for you. And then there was another plumber who's like, I can do everything. I can fix your drain, I can fix your sink, I can fix the pipes in the walls, I can do all of that. But if you're the person in the apartment that has a bad drain and you want someone quickly to fix it and just get it over with, you're going to pick the first guy because they're literally marketing to your use case in that moment, despite the fact you might even be better at doing it than the other guy. But he's marketing or she's marketing towards that.
Mm-hmm.
And so the customer is going to go to that person. The person viewing who you are is going to go to the other person. But if you were to take that first approach, market yourself in that very niche, ironically specialized way, then you can then in turn gain their trust by completing the job well and be like, hey, I'm also really great at doing all these other stuff. Since I already proved myself to you with this one way, I can also do these other things for you, and they'll be more likely to actually take you up on that. So you have to kind of get your foot in the door before you can really show off your multidisciplinariness. So you're a multi-specialist, but you have to kind of market yourself as one specialist at a time, if you will.
That makes sense. What else have you learned the hard way?
Did you not have anything to add to that per se? I thought
Oh,
maybe that you might have something.
I think that's an interesting perspective that like it might be better rather than to be like, hey, I do all the things, to be like, okay, in this situation, I'm going to highlight this capability because it seems most relevant. And then over here, I'll highlight, yeah, like this is part of um, the difficulty of being a polymath in a specialized world.
Yeah.
Like we shouldn't have to hide and censor capabilities. Like that just seems silly, especially when people are paying for professionals who are capable. Like we should want to hear about their capability, but
Yeah.
it could be distracting or overwhelming for people. And so we do have to self-censor. Like that is what I heard as I interviewed people. Did you want to say something?
Well, the censor seems like a harsh word. I don't even see it as a censor. It's more of just like people's brains often, and it's not so much the specialist society, although that is the case. That is part of it. Obviously, that's definitely part of it. Sometimes just the psychology of it. We can only focus really on one thing at a time, and then you can switch between them quickly, and that's fine. But our brains can't really keep in all that information for some people at the very least. I think some people are naturally, excuse me, more inclined towards multi-thinking. But I was thinking more on the psychology's perspective, where it's like some people just really can't keep all that information about you at that one point and take that in basis on their decision. So if we had a generalist society where everyone's more generalist and everyone's really accepting of that, I still think that this rule would still apply, at least in some cases too.
Mm-hmm. There is, I will say, there's a kind of intellectual labor because we live in a world dominated by specialists. When you're in the minority, it's a kind of minority. When you're a polymathic person in a specialized world where most people are specialized, you're a kind of minority now. And what that means is there's some intellectual labor you may have to do as a minority that the majority don't have to grapple with, that they don't have to struggle with. They can just say what they do. People understand it. They live in a box. The box is easy to understand. And so when you don't live in those single swim lanes or single boxes, you do have to kind of like help people understand you. And that is a difficult part of the journey because we live in a world where most people don't even know the word polymath and they don't even
Yeah.
think about like, oh, that's a thing you can do. I thought everybody needed to put on their blinders and get in their cage.
Yeah.
Like, sorry, I use strong language. I use strong language because I think it's not as politically correct, but it's necessary to kind of paint the picture of what's really happening in our world, where like human minds are caged by expectation, pressure, survival. You need money, you live in this system. But I don't think it's our highest calling. I don't think it's authentic for a lot of us to get into those narrow, specialized cages and stay there for entire lifetimes.
Yeah.
I don't think it's fulfilling for a lot of people who want to have the full human experience, who want to self-create and recreate and learn, unlearn, and relearn, and have life as like this discovery journey and exploration and artistic expression. Like life should be all these wonderful things. But we've lived in the society that has said, well, pick one thing and do that. And like, we'll
Yeah,
all
and
do
that's it.
that.
Well, and one thing I kind of want to point out is just a random idea that when you were explaining that you use harsh words, that's okay. And one thing I think is really interesting is that you and I are both polymathy creators, like we create content around it, but we're both different in our approaches, and that's totally fine
Yeah,
because what
we should.
we both fit different needs. And since you are someone like with a doctorate, like a hyper specialist in polymathy, by using harsh words, those words are going to be more effective coming from your mouth than my mouth because you have that background. And I think that's going to help a lot more people in that way, the way you're just expressing yourself. And I think that's actually a good thing. So I
Yeah,
just
we
wanted
get
to mention that.
discriminated against. That's another strong word I'll use. Like we literally
Yeah.
get discriminated against for being versatile and capable. Like hiring managers frequently, they just want to see that you've already done this job I'm hiring. You've already done it, or you've had a whole career that lined you up for this one thing we need, this one function, this one title. And if you don't have that kind of commitment to the one thing, your resume is just
Yeah.
next, because there's a lack of appreciation for
Yeah.
polymathy in organizations. So that's one way that we are like literally discriminated against in the workplace.
Well, and I'll skip around to a different lesson. Number 8 on this list is the negative stereotype or bias against the word polymath. And the way I like to kind of explain it is this: I started with the jack of all trades. So that phrase, jack of all trades, master of none, but oftentimes better than a master of one. Most people skip the second half, so they only kind of keep that negative connotation where master of none. And so people
That's
think,
part of the
oh,
brainwashing.
yeah,
Can we just pause? Like, why that? Why do people know jack of all trades but a master of none, and then they don't know the rest of it? Why?
I don't even think it's a negative. Like, I don't even think it was on purpose because there's the whole curiosity killed the cat, and that one I don't know what that continues into, but that's only half the quote. And I don't even know the rest of the quote, but I know it continues on, and I think we just lose it over time. There's a lot of quotes that just get misquoted all the time. There's a quote of, "If you don't know it well enough, if you can't explain it simply, then you don't know it well enough," and that's often attributed to like I think Einstein, but it was actually Richard Feynman who said it or something like that. And so there's just these collective misuse of information, or not misuse, what's the word, forgetting of like the source and what it really was back in the day.
Yeah. You know what? I shouldn't say this, but like sometimes, as intelligent as the human animal is,
Oh, we're done.
man, we can be so damn stupid. I've
Yeah.
been watching this. Oh, I want to give a shout out. Alina, my friend Alina, she recommended I watch this documentary about twin flame, like a
Mm.
twin flame group cult. And as I watched this documentary about this cult, I just was like blown away. People were literally changing their gender identity and getting surgeries because someone else told them they should. And they were in a cult and there was an expectation. Like people will go along with things they know are really wrong because it's expected of them to fit in, to be safe, to not stand out. We have this desire for safety, and we will do things we don't even agree with, or maybe we don't even have awareness that we don't agree with it. We sort of go along with things, and our minds can be totally brainwashed, totally taken over. We can make big decisions in our lives based on something someone else said, and it's not even correct. Like this is part of why I love polymath. I was asking you why you love I love polymathy because it wakes you up. It's like, oh, I need to think for myself. Oh, okay. Oh, just because I hear something on the TV doesn't mean it's true. Oh, okay. Or I read it in a book, even. It doesn't mean it's true. Let me think for myself. And in the context of this age of misinformation, we're in the age of information and misinformation. It's hard to even know what's true nowadays. So polymathy is more important than ever because we don't want our minds to just be floating off because someone else says something or thinks something. We've got to stay grounded in our
It
own
comes
knowing.
back to that curiosity.
Yeah, and be curious, hear lots of different inputs, and then use your own thinker and your own feeler, your heart, your gut, your body to make up your mind and make decisions for yourself. Otherwise, you're not free. That's not
Mhm.
free. If you just let someone decide for you your life decisions, that's not
Yeah.
good.
Well, the
Anyway,
next lesson I have here
yeah.
that I want to mention is there's two approaches. And I think this is really important to point out because there's two approaches to polymathy, and this goes for pretty much most of the scale. You can go from the decades to the years to even monthly, even weekly, and how you approach it can change based on the micro versus macro. And that's serialized versus juggling. And so one right after the other, or kind of spinning many different plates at once. And I don't see one or the other as better. It's just there's different approaches. And at some points, people do one or the other without realizing it. And I think that's kind of where a lot of polymaths kind of have a failure to complete certain things because they don't realize they need to switch to the other one. Or by the end of their lives, they took a serialized approach because that's kind of like multi-specialist, one after the other. They don't realize that, oh wait, I am a polymath because I have, 4 areas of expertise and I am curious of a person, but I kind of toned down that curiosity because I was told to by society, but I am curious still by nature. And so they are a polymath, but they don't realize it until they're like 80 or 90 and they had that whole lifetime before them.
Mm.
And then there's kind of the juggler's approach, where it's more like a jack of all trades. You have many different things going on, and if you do those long enough, you're going to become multi-specialist in those areas. It's just going to take longer because you're splitting your attention. There is the benefit of interleaving and, you know, following the dopamine, as some neurodivergent people talk about, where it's like, hey, if I'm interested in this, I'm going to put my energy towards it. So I'm actually going to progress faster because I'm actually doing something I'm interested in. And so regardless if you're neurodivergent or neurotypical, following what you're interested in is really important. And that might be switching between many different things at a certain time.
Yeah, and there's benefits and drawbacks to each. And I think people should just follow their own, like, do I want to do lots of things at the same time? Or do I want to have like seasons where I
Mhm.
focus and sort of get completion and competence and then move on, then maybe come back? And that it shows up in all different kinds of patterns. Another way too, in addition to like, are you doing things all at once or are you doing them in phases? Like that's one way that the learning can take place. Another thing I'll add too is like learning can be intentional
Mhm.
or it can be unintentional. Like when we all learn things we didn't intend to learn all the time. I mean, if you turn on the TV and you get information just implanting itself into you, that's not exactly intentional learning. It's very passive learning, and you don't even really know what you're going to get till it's already implanted.
Yeah.
So part of why I love polymathy is because it leaves the door open for like wonderful unintentional learning, happenstance. I mean, I heard from a lot of people I interviewed in my research, like part of what enriched their lives were these opportunities that just popped up, or amazing people they met who came into like things they didn't know would happen. We should definitely leave room for like the unexpected,
Yeah.
unintentional learning that life and the life experience brings our way.
I got an
But
example of that
yeah, go
actually.
ahead.
So one thing I've talked about is phases, and I kind of categorize my sub niches as different phases because they're not niches as in like, okay, I'm going to continuously do them. I'm going to be focusing on them for a short time, then maybe come back to them later on. I'll stop a phase, or maybe the phases will coincide with each other. And so my first one was education, the second one was swimming, and then the third being content repurposing as a subject, and then gaming as like a fourth one. And I was hoping to kind of go one, two, and three, or maybe have two at a time. But this particular year, I realized that I got kind of behind, like a lot of people did with a lot of my endeavors. So I realized this particular year, 2023, I needed to have like a multi-phase year where I focused on at least three at once and kind of just juggled them all at the same time because they all just needed progress. Maybe not a whole lot of progress, but they all needed to kind of be built up. I couldn't just focus on one like other years. And I wanted to focus on gaming, but I ended up having to kind of just toss the fourth one out the window and just focus on polymathy, swimming, and content repurposing this year. So I did have to sacrifice one, but the beginning of this year, ironically, I was messing with ChatGPT and playing around with certain ideas for the video game I was coming up with. And it started fleshing out so many ideas that I was like, I need to kind of roll with this. Like, this is actually kind of interesting. And there's all these AI generation tools for images and videos and audio that I was able to start creating game assets from these different tools. And so for the first month, I decided to put off everything I was going to do and just focus on this new endeavor for at least a month and see what I could come up with. And I obviously didn't start making the game fully, but I was able to explore a lot of new things and learn a lot of new things about these AI technologies, video game development, that kind of thing. Because I was focusing on this new, just shiny object, but I really went hard into it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I spoke a minute about unintentional learning. Like, it's okay. Like, learn unintentionally. Maybe be aware of like, oh, this program I'm watching is not exactly what I want implanted into my brain, and like
Right.
can't delete it. Wouldn't it be nice if we could just delete something that came in, but we can't. It's just with
We
us
can't.
forever. But intentional learning, polymathy as a general rule is much more about intentional learning. Like, oh, I want to learn about this. I want to experience that. This would make me more well-rounded. This would enhance my personhood. This would expose me to the kind of people I've not been exposed to and give me some new opportunities to see
Hmm.
humans in broader diversity. So there's a lot of value in unintentional learning, but there's also like, remember, be intentional too. Like, create yourself
Hmm.
through learning, unlearning, relearning.
And
Learning is,
unlearning.
yeah, the unlearning and the relearning is really important too, because I think society has come to like falsely believe that like school is for learning. You go to school to learn. And then when you're out of school,
You stop.
uh, you might learn
Yeah.
a little bit, but you're not. So the thing that makes polymath is that there is this lifelong and life-wide commitment and passion for learning and learning
Yeah.
what you're curious about. Like, you don't have to force yourself to learn about things that don't appeal to you. I know when I'm forced to learn something I'm not into, I probably won't even retain much of it. Like, there has to be an incentive for me in my brain to learn about something, otherwise I'm not interested. I'm not going to retain. I'm not going to waste my memory on something
Yeah.
that's not pertinent in my life. So anyway, did you have a thought you wanted to say?
I was just gonna say one of the lessons on there is that it is a lifelong journey. So
Exactly. Yeah, life is like a playground for learning to me. I
one of my
love learning.
friends in the polymath world, who you might not have known yet, he came on the show pretty early on. He came up with the polymath playground, and because it's kind of like playing with life and exploring different things. And so yeah, just want to shout him out, Eric Wallace.
Yeah. Life is a polymath playground, isn't it? If you let it be. You make life about learning and growing and improving and evolving and self-actualizing, being bold and brave and curious. Like, these are all the traits, by the way. Oh, let me tell you this. I've not really verbalized this enough. So my doctoral dissertation was focused on the lived experiences of modern day polymaths. And believe it or not, no one else had ever done that study before. It just had not been done. I mean, you got to wonder why. In academia, they're highly specialized. They're not really studying polymathy over there, are they?
Right.
Well, that's not very smart. But anyway, what was I going to say? Oh God, I lost the thought.
Give it a
Oh,
second.
um, I lost it. It'll come back to me. I hate when that happens. I got so many things in my brain. Sometimes one just like pops out and I forget it for a minute.
As a
um,
host, that's really hard because like I've done a lot of interviews and I've had to like focus on active listening and try to like not think about what I want to say and I think about what they're saying, and it's hard because you want to keep that idea flowing, but you have to kind of just hold it there in the back
I
of you.
know I should have written it down in my notes. It'll come back to me probably if I'm lucky, but if not, oh well.
They say if it's important, it'll come back.
Yeah. It had something to do. I remember now. Polymathy before my dissertation was associated with many learnings or
Mhm.
dead people from history who historians called polymaths. But polymathy really wasn't for us modern people. Like, the dominant narratives were like, no, no, we're not polymaths, but the dead people can be. And then polymathy, I didn't intend to do this, but because my study looked at living polymaths, I learned that there are all these things associated with modern polymathy that might not have even been true for historic polymaths. But for modern polymaths, it is absolutely associated with a little bit of rebelliousness,
Mhm.
curiosity, wanting to be your best self. Being brave. You gotta be brave to be an original.
I've heard some polymathic people call themselves mavericks too.
Yeah, yeah, Mavericks. Um, what else is it associated with? Obviously, self-directed learning, like an intentional and unintentional learning, yeah, or serially, or at the same time, simultaneously learning. Like it can come in all different forms and combinations. It's a very individual journey. Um, But when I think of polymath, I think of someone who, like, if they're a modern day polymath, I'm like, oh, they're brave. Oh, they're curious. Oh, they're really good at learning. Like, there's a whole package of traits that will come along with being a modern polymath. So for me, it's not as simple as like, oh, just learn a lot, just go ahead and memorize a lot. It's about like self-creation, self-actualization, being your best, contributing. There are all these things that come along with it in my
Mm-hmm.
mind, that it's not
Makes
just many
sense.
learnings.
Yeah.
Yeah. What comes up for you when you hear that? Do you see that there's like a package of other
Maybe
related
not as
traits?
you listed off a lot of package parts, but I think for me, three or more areas obviously is kind of the base definition. But from that, I would also say that obviously the curiosity is a deep part of that, and that curiosity spins off into that self-directed learning because you really
Yeah.
have to be given the context of our society. How one of the lessons on the post is that the education system is not made for us. And so we have to be self-directed because of that, which is why I created the modular degrees so that way people could have a framework to use. And that was like my motivation because there are a lot of polymaths who don't know how to self-direct their learning. They might want to do it and they might do it naturally anyways, but they don't know necessarily how to do it because it is complicated to organize all that information. And so there is that kind of self-directed, like you said. I think there's also just a matter of there's some people who are naturally inclined towards it and some people who kind of fall themselves into it. And I think there's some people in the polymath space who think that it's only naturally inclined. Like there's a certain wiring you have to be.
Hmm.
And I think that that's not necessarily true. I think it is true that there's a lot of people who are wired that way. Like you and I are wired that way. I knew that from a pretty early age. Like I said, the entrepreneurial lifestyle, like I knew from a young age I was not going to be like other people. And I'm not saying I'm special or anything like that because there's a lot of people like me, but I just knew that I needed to be doing something different. Otherwise, I'm not going to be happy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to touch upon that too, because I do get a lot of comments of like people, there are some people in the polymath space, they're all about high IQ.
Mm.
They're all about elitism and they're all about making this like only for the top little percentage of humanity. And I refuse to participate in that disgusting
Polymath is not
narrative.
about IQ.
I will not participate in that narrative. I refuse. I think it's dehumanizing and inaccurate. The narrative I care about is yes, there's some ability to learn that is genetic and inborn and nature. Nature versus nurture is the debate here.
Yeah.
You got to have a decent brain that can learn. Most people have that, unless you have a learning disability or something like that. We all have the potential to become polymathic.
Yeah.
So there is some nature, but it's mostly, in my opinion, the narrative I think is much more accurate, is that to some extent becoming polymathic, maybe not a polymath, but becoming polymathic in your learning and your way of living and thinking is a choice.
Yeah.
It's a choice.
So speaking of a choice, I was going to say it's not about IQ, really.
No.
Almost not at all, because and I know that some of the like what the people you're talking about, like they think it's IQ or think of it's like oh it's an intelligence level eco thing. The thing is with polymathy, you have SQ and EQ and IQ, special quotient. Like there's a certain special factor. There's the emotional intelligence. There's the regular kind of logical spatial intelligence. And there's naturalist intelligence, and there's also the creative intelligence too. There's a lot of different kinds of intelligences, and I think polymaths embody multiple kinds. But for another example, there's a man named Christopher Langan who has like the highest IQ I think ever recorded, like 200 or something like that. Which I mean, granted, a lot of these measurements are different depending on where you take the IQ test. But there's a lot of studies around him and how he was like a really smart guy. But due to his nurture, due to his upbringing, he wasn't able to really go into that IQ. He wasn't able to use it. He wasn't able to take advantage of it. And despite having a high IQ and being someone who has the potential to be a polymath, I think he really did pursue some things pretty deeply. but he just really doesn't take that polymathic lifestyle. In fact, from what I understand, he kind of just gave up and didn't really do anything else after a certain point. And so, regardless of having a high IQ, it doesn't mean that you just automatically make that choice. You still have to make that choice yourself.
Yeah. And like, who's going to decide what IQ is the minimum to be a polymath? Who's going to make that call? I know I won't.
I think from the couple tests that I've taken, I'm only slightly above average IQ. And even then, I don't even believe that per se. Like, I feel like I'm just average IQ. Maybe higher EQ because I have it in my family. Like, that's just where my genetics come from. But beyond that, I know if I say that out loud, people are going to take that as an egotistical kind of thing. It's like, I'm just stating facts here. I'm not actually trying to brag or anything like that. I'm just trying to use myself as an example. But yeah, the
All
numbers don't
my
really matter.
IQ proves is that you were good at taking that IQ test.
Yeah. Which, I mean, does help with like memory and like logic. But yeah, yeah.
Whatever that
I
test is
sucked at those kind
looking.
of tests.
Yeah. I never felt like standardized exams adequately summarized my intelligence. Like I'd still be like well above average, but I never felt like I performed as well as a test as my brain worked in real life.
Yeah.
It was a piece of paper or some clicks on a screen trying to judge me. That's what it was, and measure me and quantify me and put me in a, and I don't have a lot of respect. That test may be useful for some outcomes you may need a certain range of IQ for certain jobs or certain whatevers, but I've never even taken an IQ test because I don't really respect it. Like for me, like what is it going to tell me? Like I'm smart? Well, I already know I'm smart. I'm not going to let a test tell me someone's not smart because they didn't do, great on some single exam. Like their whole life is somehow less pointless or less valuable now because of how they performed on one test. I'm
Well, and with IQ tests, it's usually one of those things where you need to take more than one to really get an accurate kind of
But
understanding
even,
too.
I don't know, even if you took it multiple times, I'm like, okay, well, it told you how you did on that test.
Yeah.
Now, how transferable is it to making assumptions about how you'll function in real life? Like,
Yeah.
it doesn't do that. It's not designed to do that, really. It's designed to measure your intelligence quotient. And yeah, I'm glad it exists. I don't mean to disrespect the IQ test too much, but it's really, for me, I don't like that high IQ has become associated with polymathy, because polymathy is about many learnings. And yeah, an IQ is something
That's what I was saying. It's multiple
different.
intelligences. It's not just the IQ. There's like not. There's a guy who came up with 9 different intelligences, and it's a pretty famous book. I don't remember what it's called though, off the top of my
Oh,
head.
Gardner.
Gardner, yeah, that's all right.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really good way of looking at it because there's way more than just logical and spatial. Like IQ wise, I probably have terrible when it comes to those tests and when it comes to rote memorization and stuff like that. I don't really care enough to remember stuff like that. But when it comes to spatial, I can have a whole Google Maps 3D, like I have 3D Google Maps in my head of my hometown. I went to Houston 1 week for 1 week a couple years ago, and I still can remember pretty vividly in 3D where I went to and how it looked like. And it's one of those things where I think I trained that playing video games most of my life, but and it helped me kind of build that part of my brain. But so like on the spatial type of intelligence, it's pretty high, and that's usually associated with IQ. So for part of the IQ test, I would have a lot on it, but the other part I would not. And so that's one of those things where those tests aren't always going to be as accurate.
If I'm trying to figure out if someone I've met is smart, I'm not going to go like, hey, what's your IQ? Like, to me, that would just be so funny. I'd be much more interested in like, how self-aware are they? How good are they at communicating their ideas to another person? How good at they are managing their own lives? How good is this person at like their emotional intelligence? How good are they at finding what's really true and
And
not just
balancing.
being convinced by lies that seem true, but really, if you thought about it, if you did some real critical thing, like to me, that's intelligence, not like how you did on a test.
Yeah. And like balancing conversation and understanding the person. Because like EQ, for example, it's not just emotional awareness of other people, it's also emotional awareness of yourself and how you present yourself and how you are thinking and how you are doing things.
Yeah. And critical thinking is so important. A lot of the IQ test, I'm not expert in IQ tests, but I think a lot of that is like, were you able to memorize?
Mhm.
Robots can memorize. Like that doesn't mean memorization is required to
Really.
be truly intelligent, but intelligence is much more than storage of information. It's really being able to decipher and apply and synthesize and, find what's accurate.
Um,
Did you want to say something?
Sorry, my entire computer just like froze for a second there.
Yeah,
That's
I
really
saw that. I saw that.
all right. Well, I'm back.
What else
I
should
think
we
I
talk
heard you,
about?
but honestly, it's up to you at this point. I think I talked about a lot of my content. It's one of those things where I think a lot of people who are in this space would benefit from the newsletter because I tried to take a unique approach to it. And so I tried hoping that maybe the Journey to Polymathy newsletter that I write will help a lot of people. And knowledge management is
Well,
another area too.
sorry, where can they, how can, if someone wants to sign up for your newsletter or read it, where do they go? What do they do?
PolyInnovator.space. That's my website, and it's pretty simple right at the top, newsletters or like sign up in the corner there too. And it's just one of those things where I have more than one, and I think that's kind of interesting too. Having more than one on the same website is kind of fun, but that's a whole nother like content creator little tangent.
You just love to create content.
Oh my gosh, it's
You
insane.
create so much.
I have two that I need to make today, and I've made one almost at least one or two every day this week.
It's
Pieces.
impressive, your dedication to this. That's
I'm
what I
trying to
want to,
get through a big bulk of stuff.
I want to let anybody who watches my content, like check out Dustin. Like he really has created a lot of videos, podcasts, newsletters. Like he's thought
Oh,
a lot about this stuff.
I should mention the show too. We haven't talked about that. I
Yeah.
started the Polymath Polycast as like a solo thing where the first season's all solo episodes, but in 2020 when everyone was stuck at home, we all had access to Zoom and stuff like that. I started interviewing people who I considered polymathic, and while not all of them are polymath, some of them might be more jack of all trades or generalist level. I still wanted to highlight that multidisciplinary life and have people on the show and talk about them and understand their mindset and the mental model. And one of my there's only one question I really ask every single guest, and it's what is a polymath to you? And some of the responses I get from that, even people who literally I could say at least like 25% of the people who come on the show had not heard of the word polymath before coming on,
Mhm.
and even some of their responses to that word was really interesting. And it's one of those things where when they start thinking about it critically, like you're saying, they come up with really cool responses. I can't think of any on top of my head at the moment, but I just remember in the moment feeling very overwhelmed from the response, and that's a good feeling.
You know what that makes me want to do? It
Mm.
makes me want to ask you, what it is a polymath to you, Dustin Miller, PolyInnovator?
I sort of answered that earlier, but I'll kind of come up with a new way of explaining it here. It is someone, like you said, that recreates themselves. It's someone who really follows their own passion. It is someone with multi expertise, and I think that's really key. I've always been interested in many different things, and I wanted to pursue each of those things. And I think the most optimal way of doing that is to be polymathic in every approach in your life. And so I think a polymath is someone who takes a polymathic approach. That might seem like, oh, yeah, duh, but not every polymath I've met does that. And I think that's something that you have to be conscious of. So, like my content, for example, I try to take a very wide ranging and deep in every aspect. Some content creators only do video or only do blog posts or only do podcasts, and I think you need to do all three. You need to do them all really well to be a real like great content creator. You could be a great blogger, great podcaster, great, that's fine, but taking that polymathic approach will make you grow 10 times faster, make you actually have a much more likelihood of reaching the people you want to reach. And that's just one example. As a swimmer, right, I taught swimming for a decade. Some of my more recent posts is being a swimming generalist, for example, and learning a simple skill as swimming. Well, I say simple, it's not that simple, but you're moving from point A to point B in the pool. Boom, right? There's multiple different kinds of strokes. You have the front crawl where you're on your stomach crawling through the water. You have the breaststroke where you're going underwater, the butterfly where you're going really fast, kind of like a dolphin up and down, the backstroke. All these different strokes, they have their own different angle. You learn different lessons from each different stroke. You may only care about the front crawl because that's the most common stroke, the front stroke kind of thing. You want to use that for exercise. You want to use it so you know how to swim when you're in the ocean so you don't drown, right? You might only care about that one particular stroke, but by learning the other ones, they'll teach you lessons that'll then in turn help you with your main stroke. And then you know the other ones too. And so by taking that polymathic approach to swimming, it'll help you better yourself with that main one you do. So even if you are a specialist in one area and just like an intermediate level knowledge in other areas, by taking that polymathic approach, you can learn and interleave and bring in from those different points.
Hmm. Is there anything else you'd like the world to know or people to know about you and what you're trying to promote, or any final thoughts, any tips, recommendations for someone watching this?
Going forward, I'm really going to be focusing on this knowledge management for polymaths. And I think knowledge management as a concept is really interesting. It's actually what my modular degree, that do-it-yourself degree that I created is. It's just a framework that I made in a tool, a knowledge management tool, to help people organize their learning. I made the same kind of thing for content people too. So content creators can have a nice advanced database to organize all their knowledge that they want to create content out of. Same thing for a holistic system that I created, the PIOS, where I wanted to have this system for people to organize their lives from the yearly all the way down to the hourly level and really try to maximize every endeavor they want to try. If you're taking a multidisciplinary approach, you need a way to organize it. And that's what I try to create content for, to teach people about. How do you organize your multidisciplinary polymathic life?
I love that. Yeah, it can be overwhelming when you're someone who's got a lot of inputs coming
Yeah.
and you got so much you're keeping track of. And yeah, like keeping organized would be wonderful. Please do continue to share about knowledge management for polymaths, because I think a
Well, how
lot
do
of
you think I
people
make
would
so much
need that.
content?
Yeah. Oh God. I run like 5 different businesses or brands across 3 industries, and I'm constantly overwhelmed. Like, where am I? Where is that? Like, if I had some master way of organizing everything, that would be good.
It's like orchestrating your life, and all those different phases that I'm doing this year concurrently, I wouldn't have been able to do that had I not had a system helping me along the way.
Yeah, exactly. Any final thoughts or recommendations before we end this conversation?
So I would just kind of refer back to the Polymath Polycast and then the Journey to Polymath newsletter. Those are the two resources I think that your audience will probably like the most. And then obviously the PIOS itself too might be a system that you might want to adopt for yourself too. I mainly have it in Notion, but I have it in other tools as well. So in case people want to know what it is. But maybe there might be some people listening in on your show that might want to come onto my show and be interviewed, or maybe there's some people who want to read the newsletter to learn about the serialized approach or juggling approach or how to focus and all these different lessons for polymaths.
I love it. Well, I'm so glad that you're in the space and you're just continuing to work really hard to promote this simple idea that humans should be able to learn many things
Yes.
as they so choose.
And do it well.
And do
Thanks
it
for having me.
well. Be the best it can be. All that you can be. All right, guys. Well, thanks for watching. Dustin, thanks for talking with me.
Thanks for having
And
me.
all right, that's all for now. Bye,
That's
everybody.
all, folks.
That's all, folks. Bye.